So welcome to the Freedom Park Conservancy's first public input meeting. We are very excited to be here today along with SWA Group and Sycamore Consulting. Thank you for joining us. I am Harriet Lane, Board Chair of the Freedom Park Conservancy. The goal of the Freedom Park Conservancy is to get the opinions of all of our neighbors and the city at large, to see what they want this park to be and provide tools that meet people where they are now. We have notified neighborhood presidents, neighborhood board directors around the park, sent newsletters, releases to the media, partners and institutions, purchased ads, and we have a dedicated website because your opinion matters to us. We encourage you to take full advantage of our online survey by visiting the Freedom Park website at freedompark.org and clicking Master Plan. It's the #1 thing you can do right now to engage. And please check back often for the calendar updates as well as the video recaps of the public input meetings. We have our first public input meeting from noon today that's already on the website. It's also on Facebook Live and it's on our Facebook page now. Now is the time to continue the vision and expand the potential of Freedom Park for the 21st century with your input. So let's get started with a few introductions. First, I would like to introduce you to the Master Plan Chair, Stephanie Wolfgang.
Hi.
And Master Plan Coordinator, David Hamilton.
Hi, guys.
I would also like to introduce you to Jay Tribby, Chief of Staff to Atlanta's District 2 Councilman Amir Faroqi. Amir was here this morning and said a few welcoming words, and we'd love to hear a few words from you too. Jay?
Looks like Jay may be muted.
Yep, he just left a message. It says, "Hi everyone, this is Jay, Chief of Staff to Atlanta District 2 City Councilman Amir Faroqi. I look forward to this meeting. Did you know that the most of Freedom Park is located in Council District 2? If you have comments that you want to convey to Amir after the meeting, here is his city email address, and we have it here, and I'll make sure that you get it at the end of this conversation. At the end of this presentation. There are several other additional members of the steering committee that are here tonight. Christina Moore, Vice President and Representative for Candler Park.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming.
And Nancy Boyd, Board Vice President and Art Chair. And last, I would like to introduce you to Jen Price and Ed Cadell, who are public involvement experts with Sycamore Consulting, and they are located here. Jen will be taking over from here and leading us into the meeting. Jen?
Thank you so much, Harriet, and thanks to all of y'all for joining us this evening. First, I'll give you guys a quick rundown of today's agenda, and then we'll just get rolling with the fun today. So, just as a note to you guys, we are recording this meeting, and we'll again put this on the website, and you'll be able to view it at another time. Also, just know that you can submit questions at any time throughout this presentation. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can leave your name, or you can remain anonymous if you would like, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. So, why are we here? The original design of Freedom Park dates back to the height of planning for the Olympics almost 30 years ago, and the park has changed very little since then. The communities around the park, however, have changed dramatically, so it's certainly time for an update to the master plan. So what is a park master plan? A master plan is a dynamic long-term planning document that provides a conceptual layout to guide future growth and development. The Freedom Park Master Plan will provide a frame of reference and purpose by engaging the community at large to help determine what we all want this park to be in the years to come. The Conservancy has been thinking about this for several years, and they finally raised the funds to do it in 2019, but that was pre-COVID. That being said, we think now is a really good time to reevaluate the worth and the place of public space and parks. Because of COVID and where we are as a city, our open spaces are becoming increasingly important. Having outdoor public spaces with clean air and cultural value becomes even more crucial now that people are using parks in a different way and with greater frequency as a relief from being confined indoors. As recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic continues, we want Freedom Park to provide a quality and sustainable experience for our city for generations to come. On the screen now, you'll see the overall schedule for the master plan project. It is a 6-month effort. We're here today for the first public meeting, and we'll be back to you 2 more times over the next 6 months. We'll be back in October to review some of the concepts in a more interactive format. And then the final meeting will be to unveil the master plan to you all. In between the meetings, you'll still be able to engage with us and provide your input and ideas. And Ed will talk to you guys about that at the end of the meeting. But for now, I'll hand it over to our partners at SWA, Kinder, Natalia, and Scott. They'll walk through the project scope and the design process and all of the other master planning details. Kinder?
Kendra, I don't believe we're hearing you.
Now you're muted. Are we good?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right, guys. Even just Jeff Bezos didn't know how to get his phone off mute. Okay. So yeah, we've done a lot of work in Atlanta over the years, a lot of planning work, a lot of detailed design work, and it's a great city, and we're extremely excited about this opportunity to get to look at developing a framework and a master plan for such an important piece of the city. The question though, that we ask anytime we start a park is, what does this park want to be? And we think that the opportunity is for it to be a great park, and we need to start to define that, because it can mean a lot of things. A great park can be something for the community right adjacent. It can be for the entire city or the nation. And we need to get into the weeds of it and try to understand that. To start though, what we like to do is just kind of look at key words, visions, images that kind of suggest, ideas and things, so that everyone starts to kind of think creatively. And so that's kind of where we are in the process. So, all right, is it that going to do it? There we go. Would I just click it? Okay. All right. Sorry. So the first thing is, looking at other parks in the world, right? Everyone knows Central Park, which is, a big historic park full of exciting things to do. But not so many people know Hunters Park. It's a world-class park that's just been built on the East River, looking across at Manhattan, but they serve very different purposes. Today you would not go in and try to recreate Central Park, because people's expectations, the things they want to do in a public open space, they're just very different. Even the attitudes towards art, sustainability, all those things are different. And so that's really kind of impacted how we've thought about things like Hunters Point. Other way, okay. Boston Common, right? So everyone knows that's an important piece of the infrastructure of downtown Boston. It's been there since the city was founded, but again, very historic. They used to graze cattle there. Come along later, they built the Rose Kennedy Greenway. It tries to meet the needs of a different set of users. It has a very different style, very different approach to the design of a park. Again, we need to understand those kinds of preferences when we go about designing this park, and we want to hear that from you. In Chicago, there's Millennium Park, very new and contemporary, but also a lot of historic forms. Highly programmed park. During COVID, there's not a lot to do in Millennium Park because it does require, or it depends upon, ice skating, concerts, big groups getting together. Whereas our other park, new one, Chicago 606, kind of like the the High Line or the Belt Line as well, that moves through the city. And you don't have to have programmed activities. You can kind of decide how you want to use it and what you want to do. And then, of course, in Atlanta, right, we want to make sure that our park, Freedom Park, isn't trying to duplicate the things that already happen at Piedmont Park. It needs to be very different. The context is different. The people are going to use it in different ways. And the issues that we're dealing with are very different. So the big themes that we want to think about and kind of talk about as we get into planning, you know, we'll kind of go through a list of them. Nature is a big one. How important is that to this site, to this project? It feels very natural. Lots of big trees, rolling topography. But if you step back and look at it, and Scott will talk about it in more detail, the nature's pretty simple. It's big trees, it's turf. Maybe there should be more. That's a question that you guys need to help us answer. The idea of immersing yourself into a parkscape, a landscape, a park, all the things there are to do with it. We feel that when you design a great park, that it's sort of a bit of an escape from the city. Of course, it needs to reflect the city that it's in, but it should do other things besides just kind of, you know, being city-like. And then connection. You want to connect with the neighbors that live adjacent to the park. You want to connect with people that are maybe visiting Atlanta for a short time or a long term. And then you want to be able to connect with nature, health, wellness, all those kinds of things kind of fit into what that means. And then community. Who are we trying to serve? What is the community of Freedom Park? Is it the Atlanta region, or is it the neighbors that surround it? There's world-class, world-known facilities there, like the Carter Center. So that attracts people from around the world. But we know also that there's people's backyards that abut the park. So that attracts a very different kind of people, right? People that live there. We need to consider that. And then equity, that's a huge one, right? You can't design a park today without thinking about who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, and making sure that it provides opportunities for all. Variety is important, and variety can mean a variety of programmatic things to do. So it could be new types of play, but it could also be, like going back to nature, it could be new types of biodiversity. You know, there's not a wetland, for example. There's not a lake in the park. Are those things that are needed? Maybe, maybe not. It needs to speak to people of all age groups. We can't just design for young or old or kids. We need to make sure that everybody has a place to interact, but also that they're brought together so that creates, I think, a more sticky park and a more interesting place to be. How do you get to the park? Mobility is important. Do I take my car, in which case I need the place to park? Do I take transit? Do I ride a bike? Do I walk from the neighborhood? Probably all of these things are in play, but we need to program and build a park master plan that really embraces those things. Simple and intuitive. Experience is a huge thing in any design projects today. You know, if you don't Instagram it, then it doesn't exist. So we need to think hard about how that ideal kind of plays into the design of Freedom Park. Do we want places, objects, artwork that people feel compelled, you know, to share? That helps put projects on the map. It makes people aware of it, which helps with funding, which helps with maintenance. So there's lots of things that grow out of what is seemingly a very kind of shallow idea that's actually pretty interesting and intriguing. And then character, right? What is the character of the park? Is it historic? Is it contemporary? Is it neither? Those are big questions that we'll deal with as we work through this plan. And then art. We already know that art is an important part of the park. There's a great art program that is slowly being implemented over time, but we need to expand upon that and say, you know, is art a part of the gateway experience of arriving at the park? Is it part of the experience of driving through the park, not just walking or riding a bike? All of these things need to be in play. We need to really think about how the art can inform the idea of this park in a much bigger way. So you're gonna pick up?
I'm gonna pick it up
I'm
here.
gonna back up.
And I'm gonna keep talking about great parks. And I think in context of Freedom Park, because it is so large, it has a tremendous potential to reflect the culture of Atlanta, the city that it represents, as well as serving neighborhoods that surround it. And when we think about the origins of the park itself and the history of civic activism in Atlanta, it's a really great site to communicate to the world, how things get done in the city. A lot of things get done in the city. The fact that it's touching on the historic sites that were a cradle of civil rights in America is tremendously influential and important for our thinking, because it's not just about green space, it's also about history and interpretation of that history. And a lot of that history is actually embedded within the site itself. The Battle of Atlanta happened essentially in and around Freedom Park. The fact that the city of Atlanta is leading the nation in environmental stewardship and in designing, for green lungs of the city going forward, and being very sensitive and curating ideas around green space consideration is going to be tremendously important in how it's reflected in Freedom Park. And the fact that Atlanta is a cultural capital of the southeastern United States, both for visual and performing arts. And, as park has been designated as official Atlanta's art park, back in 2007, we would need to consider what that actually means, within the bounds of the park, both for visual and for performing arts. And, as we came to find out, Atlanta's airport is the busiest airport in the United States and one of the busiest gateways to the North American continent from the world. And, people arriving in the city really probably understand it, in a very limited time. The ability of the park to become this destination and reflect the city and the culture of Atlanta is huge and has a great potential to tell Atlanta-specific stories. And last but not least, park is really representative of very contemporary trends in park design and park development pretty recently over the last couple of decades. And that's what, Kinder mentioned earlier in his presentation, where we're talking about reclaiming infrastructure for public space, be it rail infrastructure, freeway infrastructure. And Atlanta is showing leadership in converting rails to trails through the largest conversion project in the nation in the Beltline and footprint, and as well as Freedom Park is, mimicking that in thinking of a formally considered freeway space becoming incredibly valuable park space in the center of the city. So, the history of the park is completely intertwined with infrastructure, as we all know. The footprint of the park, as you start reading into the shape of it, is looking at the footprint of a freeway that was planned for that site. So we decided to go back and look at the history of infrastructure around the site and see how that land that we are now considering for the future actually emerged. And going back to the pretty far history, the fascinating fact that the park is touching the subcontinental divide presents a lot of opportunity in considering very unique hydrology, as we have high and low points, but we're basically at the dividing line where, the water, the Atlantic watershed and Gulf Coast watershed meet, which is incredibly fascinating. Indigenous pathways came together where current Atlanta downtown is, and we're right there. The park was just, waiting for it to happen. The railroad settlements, kept developing the city, and over time, the city kept growing. And what we see here is, kind of a ring around the center is what eventually became Atlanta's Beltline, and our site is right there. The garden suburbs, in the early 20th century, developed around the streetcar lines. And some of them are still, traces of some of them are actually still preserved and still going through the park that you can see today, even though the streetcars no longer exist. The streetcars got replaced by cars and interstate highway system, really started dictating patterns of development, in all American cities, and Atlanta no exception. And so this is where we come, to today, and understanding the potential of the site as it's kind of, is being birthed out of the infrastructure. Going forward, we're starting to tap into its potential. That is now not tied to the freeway, specifically, but has now become a center of Atlanta's urban renaissance, as it is embedded in some of the most important historical communities in the city, as it's right in the middle of educational activity. It's regionally very connected, as it is overlapping with one of the quote unquote bike superhighways, Stone Mountain Trail. So regionally, it's a very important alternative modality connection. So in essence, when we look at the current positioning of Freedom Park in the city, it's becoming its beating heart, and understanding that potential going forward and developing that into a great park, we'll have to take into consideration, some of the systems that we already talked about, but also the fact that it's very uniquely kind of shaped, sized, and also, the kind of the catchment area that is available to the park in terms of user groups, and some of the people that probably use the park on a daily basis but don't even know that they are in the park. So the potential of the site is tremendous. Kind of tying back to the idea of building the great park is really going back to what constitutes the building components of the great park. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Scott, and he's gonna talk about those components.
So any master plan starts with a deep analysis, really, of the site and of the surrounding context in the region. And that's everything looking at the hydrology, to the environmental conditions, the neighborhoods, how people move around the city and so forth. So we can really get a sense about how the park operates, both within the boundaries of the park, but also how it connects and stitches back to the community. So we've developed a number of analysis maps. This is a sampling of them here on the screen. We will post these to our website, and you'd be happy. We'd welcome you to go through them and see what we're seeing, and maybe even point out things that we don't know. This is an ongoing effort that will continue through the master plan. But I'm going to just step back a moment, and rather than trying to walk you through all of that, let's just simplify things and think about analysis in these 5 basic principles. So planning, certainly how the neighborhoods are constructed around it, what's happening within them, sort of some of the limitations and some of the opportunities. Mobility, as Kinder was mentioning earlier, how people move in and around, whether it be by transit, by car, by bike, by foot. The environment, what's the ecology of the park, what's the what's happening within there. Programming, what is there to do within there or within the surrounding region, and ultimately character. And this relates a little bit towards what Kinder was leaving off on his great park sort of summary about the opportunities for what you're projecting out of your image to the park. Is there an Instagram motive? Is it a more passive park? So let's just look at that step by step quickly here. There's a lot to talk about, but for planning, this sort of chaotic map you're looking at here represents just kind of like a snapshot. If you took the basic outline of the park and you offset it, say within half-mile radius, and just decide what that catchment area is, what are the kinds of things we're seeing happening in and around the park? And the first thing we'll notice is obviously it's a lot of residential. There are these pretty unique mixed use and retail pockets that are occupied within the surrounding neighborhoods. Each one's very specific to the history and to the culture of those communities. We've got some pretty unique features. We've got the Carter Center in the middle. We've got Martin Luther King Landmark District towards the southwest. So there's schools and libraries. There's a lot to work with in around the park. The other thing you'll notice on this diagram is the outline that sort of surrounds the boundary of the park. And you'll see these red and blue lines. And what the red represents is all of the basically residential neighbors or houses, properties that back up to the park, and the blue represents more public or openings to the park. So what you start to see is a park that is, in many ways, has this very unique relationship. Most urban parks actually usually have a lot of more public access. So this park has actually a lot of limited access in for certain stretches of it anyways, and also a very porous nature, which is kind of reflective of what the shape of the park as well. So that's something to consider, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But if we just think about sort of looking forward into the park design, how do we kind of synthesize some of that information and start to develop a point of view about the park? Well, so we have a park that is informed, as we all know, by this history of the transportation of the highway that ended up not being built through the hard work of a lot of people early on. And it's surrounded by a number of very unique and historic and otherwise interesting neighborhoods that each have something else to offer. Of course, you have the Beltline coming through the park as well. And of course, as we were just mentioning, a lot of those represent primarily residential communities, and single family, but also higher density stuff, particularly being built around some of the newer developments around the park. So as we think about the borders and the edges, this sort of public and private, we need to think about where are the opportunities to bring people into the park, and what's the hierarchy of bringing people into the park. There's going to be places like at the MARTA station or along some of the major roads, Jackson and others, where we're going to have probably stronger gateways into the park, but then we'll have a lot more minor gateways as well. We want to funnel and sort of position our legibility of how you maneuver around to the park through these points, and also think about how people move from the park back into these neighborhoods and really take advantage of some of the assets that they have to offer as well. So we think about it in terms of mobility. Clearly this park has, as many of you experience it, roadways that move through it, and actually almost 8 miles within the park are actually a roadside condition, which is pretty unique for a park of this size, and creates a number of challenges, but also potentially some opportunities to just think a little bit differently about the land and how you maneuver through the park. We've got some topography and bridges that bring people up and over, give people different perspectives. Of course, we've got transit, we've got bus stops and bus routes, and the MARTA station, of course, is a big one. So there's different opportunities to get here. And then we have the trails themselves that I'm sure most people on this call have taken advantage of at some point, over 10 miles of them. So all of these create a really diverse way of moving around the park and considerations. But they also create some conflicts. And you'll see those little circular nodes in the park here. We call them low comfort crossings. That's a nice way of saying, and sometimes you have dangerous intersections, or at least intersections that might otherwise interrupt the seamless experience of how you might maneuver and experience the park. So addressing those in ways that are sensitive to the neighbors and really also promote and potentially think about gateway experiences will become extremely important as we move through the master planning process. So you might take the plan and just take an example, bikes, and think about, well, so we have these trails in the park, how do they extend out into the surrounding community? We can overlay that with sort of the City of Atlanta's bikeway plan, showing these light gray lines here, and think about how that might create opportunities for transition points, whether it be about, it's a bike rental station or a bike servicing point where you can air up your tires or get a drink of water. Thinking about how that might integrate with the Beltline, and really try to promote this sort of mode of movement through the park, not above and beyond others, but just in an effort to maybe reduce the demand for cars as a primary means to necessarily get to the park. Maybe you take some of those ideas of the existing trails and you start thinking about one line, one trail system that maybe is of more significance or more higher capacity than the others. Potentially it's one that goes from east to west that takes you more or less from the downtown side out towards the on the west to the east side, and maybe out and beyond, and continues on to all the way to Stone Mountain. So it could be part of this moment in a much longer transect through the city. And then thinking about these other gateway nodes, whether it be for MARTA or for the bus stops and how those overlay. And then finally, people on foot and running and so forth, and thinking about addressing some of those crossing points, some of those dangerous crossing points, making them easier to navigate, encouraging more people to walk in from the community and feel connected across the park and within the park and through the park. and offering a range of experiences in that respect. Then you might go so far as to say, well, just given the nature of the layout of this park as it exists today, with the basically the four, I guess you could call them spokes, with the hub in the middle being the area around the Carter Center, maybe that starts to create an idea that there's sort of a higher legible ring of trails around the Carter Center that acts as sort of an orientation point for having these different experiences as you move through the park. Environment, another key issue. The park, as Kinder mentioned, is today, beautiful, green, lots of big, healthy trees, and a lot of, beautiful open turf areas, which are great for different types of flexible uses within the park. But perhaps it doesn't have the diversity of habitat potential that it could have, if that's a goal. Certainly, we all think of the potential of these urban open spaces to increase urban habitat is generally a positive thing if managed correctly within an urban environment. And so there's certainly an opportunity there. We've got a lot of topography in the park that can open up opportunities to think about how water moves through the park. Are there opportunities to gather it together in the form of wetlands and lakes? Are there opportunities to think about how we manage and use the environment to filter stormwater from road runoff? These are all opportunities that we would like to explore. And then finally, about this legibility, there's other great parks nearby, and the way some of this environment bleeds into those spaces. Do we want to create a point of acknowledging that sort of separation, or do we want to feel more seamless between some of the adjacent parks? So if we think about the environmental footprint, very simply, we might say today it's kind of a singular thing. It's grass and trees, and that's great, but it's also a little bit limited. But potentially, if we build in some diversity through sort of looking opportunistically at some of the low points or the high points within the land, thinking about sort of larger spaces within the park, and if there's opportunity to create diversity within there, and then even thinking about how wildlife or micro wildlife or urban wildlife might move through the park, and how these spaces can string together to create a much more seamless and integrated ecological footprint for the park. How can we enhance the forest to do other things, provide shade for people, but also can provide buffers for communities, can provide habitat for birds if it has the right sort of stacking, if you will, between understory and overstory. And then thinking really about this transect of downtown Atlanta as we move to the east, we call the exurban or the areas outside of the core of the city, and thinking about how this park sits within this continuum and how the environment within the park may transition as you move from east to west, from more urban experience to a more wild experience. Programming. There's a lot to do in the communities around here. These are rich communities. You have Little Five Points and Inman Corner. There's Ponce Market, obviously, is a huge one. The idea that the park needs to be self-sustaining and have all the improvements in there is not necessarily the case. In a park like this in particular, there's a large opportunity to really think about what happens programmatically within the park, but also what happens within the community and how we can leverage this porousness of the park we were talking about to create connectivity to these different features and expand the opportunities of people visiting the park, and also strengthen what's happening. If people are coming and visiting the park, they'll also have an opportunity to come and visit these interesting and beautiful neighborhoods and help support some of the economy that's being driven within these different areas around here. There's also historic landmarks that Natalia was making reference to. Certainly public art is a major component of the park currently and will expand in the future. And so thinking about how that gets overlaid will be important as well. So again, if we started with a blank slate and just thought about programming, well, we might start with the Beltline. The Beltline obviously has its own sort of collection of programming that's being built, integrated into this sort of linear transportation corridor, if you will. So the interface with there presents an opportunity for our park as well, and vice versa. This park should be a stop on the Beltline. But also some of those open areas, maybe we can consider how the land, where the land opens up, maybe that's an opportunity to integrate different types of programming, it's active pockets, whether it be the type of uses or facilities in there, but also, other things like we were just talking about with programming as it relates to ecology and so forth. And then thinking about that same trail network we were talking about, but not so much as a health and movement and wellness sort of system, but also potentially one where it starts to be about art and the different stories that the art program can start to tell about the site in Atlanta and all the issues that we think are relevant to this park. And then ultimately, all the other the landmarks in the park, think about more on a civic level, talking about the history, the connection to these important cultural institutions and so forth. So all this network has these overlays to it. And obviously nature and recreation being one that kind of currently exists, but could be enhanced as well. And then finally, the character of the park. You know, I think if you think about the park today, the legibility is obviously, it's a beautiful space. Sometimes you might not know exactly when you're entering and leaving the park, particularly as it overlays with places like Candler Park, the Olmsted Park, even the Beltline to an extent. So how do we think about defining the character of this park? Maybe wayfinding is one opportunity. If you go in there now, you might see multiple signs that tell you different things about what trail you're on and who owns and operates it. Do we need to clarify that and really sort of focus the attention on Freedom Park as a specific branded place? And then really think about how that brand can extend out into this larger catchment, if you will, catchment area of these surrounding communities as well. So how do we do that? Well, maybe we start thinking about how we define the edge. You know, is there repetition in the way we treat the landscape or the gateways and those sorts of conditions? Do we think, how do we prioritize and create a hierarchy of gateway experiences? So we might enhance signage or otherwise expand opportunities at key points within the park that really emphasize and really prioritize where we want people to come into the park, where we want to bring them to, so that we don't overwhelm the neighborhoods that surround here as well. And then even thinking about it, if we take the art analogy and we extend it out a little bit further and we said, well, the way the park is actually shaped, you can almost imagine it like a gallery. If you go to a museum and you go to different wings of the museum and each one tells a different story and has different displays, you could use that same analogy for this park. And we might start thinking about just the geographic positioning of each of these pieces as potentially offering a slightly different story to tell as you maneuver through the park. And that brings about that variety that Kinder was talking about before, that's so fundamental to creating a rich and exciting environment. And then finally, how does that project out? Vistas, we all know the Jackson Hill place where you can go get the best picture taken of the downtown Atlanta skyline, sunset. We see people out there almost every night. We saw big groups out there a few times when we were there last time. And thinking about, you know, how can we leverage moments like that? There are other parts within the park as well. And how do we create those sort of, if you will, crudely Instagrammable moments that will really start to help with this branding of the park and really help support its mission to build awareness about what the programs are within there, help with funding, help generally do all the things that are required to help the park sustain itself over a long period of time. And then also thinking about how that plays back towards the image of Atlanta. If you fly into Atlanta, the world's busiest airport, or the country, certainly the country's busiest airport, what's the first image you see? Do you see a shot of downtown Atlanta skyline taken from the Jackson Hill Bridge or taken back into the park a little bit? That's where we want to position the park. We want it to be part of the story that is the signature of what the great city of Atlanta has to offer. And then ultimately, once you've established that, that's this transect again. As you move back through the park, how do those experiences unfold as you maneuver through the different varieties of spaces? So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Ed, and Ed's going to talk a little bit about the next steps, where we are, and how you can really engage in this process actively through some of the web features that we've been developing. Ed?
Thank you, Scott. So as we mentioned before, your input is crucial to this process and helping us form this master plan. I am going to walk you through, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through our social engagement or public engagement website. And I believe I'm sharing, yes. Okay, so you can see the landing page here at the very top. We will have announcements and like registration links for public meetings, etc. A little brief statement about why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing. And then we have some fun interactive tools. We've got an interactive map. We invite everyone to take this community survey. And we also have a little forum, kind of positive leaning, to get people to talk about what their favorite things that are already in the park are. So I'll walk you through the interactive mapping tool. So you can see we've got quite a bit of input already. The red line outlines the boundary of the park. And zoom out a little bit because it's a large park. So you can see the things that people have already marked. So for an example, we could really use a pedestrian bridge here for safe crossing. Like we are, Scott and the SWA team were mentioning the Carter Center is kind of a focal point. And as it is, there is not a lot of connectivity at that point. So you can see this comment here. I'm going to go ahead and like it. And if you want to add your own input, you can click place a marker on the map. I am going to insert a gateway, a key entry point. You can also call out safety concerns, destinations, things you like, make suggestions. We definitely invite suggestions, or identify kind of popular routes that you take regularly. I'm going to do the gateway. One of my favorite little gateways is almost, I like to think of it as kind of a secret, but it is kind of the main, for me at least, coming from downtown and heading west, or east, sorry. It is my favorite way to enter into the Little Five Points neighborhood, which has all the cool shops and the fun bars and the things that we used to be able to enjoy before COVID. There is this wonderful little curb cut that takes you to, essentially links up with, this is Seminole right here. And Seminole puts you out right into the heart of Little Five Points. So I'm going to mark this one. And so you kind of have to drag the screen around where you want the marker to go. Place marker here. Then you have the option to leave a comment. I'm going to say gateway to Little Five Points. It's got my contact info saved. We do ask for a zip code and agree to the terms and conditions. You also have the option, sorry, I forgot to mention it, you can leave a photo as well, especially if you have an idea or suggestion, and maybe you have an example of something awesome at a different place that you want to say, hey, this could be here. You can leave a photo, and the general public will be able to see that. Okay, so that's the interactive map. I will take us back to the other tools are pretty self-explanatory. We've got our community survey, which we definitely invite everyone to take. We've got our community forum, where you can leave a comment about something that you like about the park. We've got a couple of comments already. And then further down, we've got kind of the general schedule for this master plan. Where are we in the planning process? And finally, we're going to advertise our public meetings. We've got our next public meeting is going to be October 15th. We're going to, again, excuse me, again, we're going to do 2 sessions, one at noon and one at 7 p.m. And that one, I know this one was a lot of us talking and people listening, but that one we're going to try to make it a little bit more interactive. And in the meantime, we are planning a photo challenge, which we will advertise on this website and link to our, if you haven't already followed us on Instagram and Facebook, please do. So we're going to announce a photo challenge with some potential prizes. And with that, I think it would be a good idea to talk about what will we be talking about at the next meeting. SWA, if you would like to maybe comment briefly on what the next meeting is going to entail. I think y'all are on mute.
Thank you, Ed. So between the start of the project and the next presentation on October 15th, our goal is really to listen to the community. One of the silver linings of this Zoom adventures is the fact that a lot of these tools can be left online for a long time for people to comment and participate at their leisure, not just come to the public meetings and for us to kind of collect input only that way. So our goal, as I said, to listen, through this comment period. And at the next meeting on October 15th, we'll be showing, what we call a draft master plan concepts. They may not necessarily add up to this polished, completely flushed out vision, but we'll have big ideas that deal with the overall systems of the park. We'll have medium ideas that probably deal at the neighborhood scale, and we'll probably have small ideas that also work at the site scale. And by site scale can be things like, we're looking at Jackson Street Bridge and the gateway to the park from that location. What does that look like? How do we address safety at that intersection? Is there a branded sign that's going right there, and how does it coordinate aesthetically with surrounding historic neighborhood? We might look at biodiversity concepts that we talked about in terms of a garden space somewhere in the park, and we'll illustrate it probably in very tangible way, through some kind of rendering or a section that people can really understand the space through. Or we can look at other ideas, maybe dealing with interpretive kind of overlay, and some of the tools may not even be physical. Some of the tools may be digital. So depending on the comment period and our kind of collection of these ideas, and then our own intuitions and perceptions from the site, hopefully that will start creating a path for the master plan and to go forward. And around early December, that's when we'll come back to you guys and unveil what we will call, pre-final master plan, because we'll still be collecting comments after that to make sure to incorporate, in the vision.
But the next workshop will be really important. I think that's the opportunity,
yes, right,
as Ed mentioned, for real interactive. So we will be presenting things, but it really will be a feedback loop in real time. And we'll clarify how exactly we're going to do that. I think we're still working on some of the tools, but it's real important that we come out of that meeting with as much feedback as we can get, and take things off the table, add things to the table that we may have missed, or that may have come up, because every idea that is generated potentially can stem to another idea that hasn't been thought yet. So it's an ongoing process. So we look forward to that aspect.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Natalia and company, can you post or share your screen again with like the final slide that has the website and the email?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So we'll open it up to questions. Feel free to ask away. We've got the Q&A box. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, you can see the little Q&A box. We've got one question right away, and I'll throw this out there. Panelists, feel free to answer as you feel fit. From Ken Edelstein, he asks, I'm very interested in how Freedom Park can provide connectivity and serve itself as something like a gateway to Candler Park, which has a lot of amenities. Are you coordinating with other green spaces to get more of a symbiosis with other plans? Ken is a board member of the Candler Park Conservancy, but this is a personal question. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I'll jump in from the board perspective. Yes, we are coordinating with and looking into all these adjacent green spaces, and as part of the rigorous analysis period that SWA has been going through, we've been talking to a lot of these partners. So I'll let them kind of jump in with how we might relate to those types of adjacencies.
Yeah, so I would say that, I mean, obviously there's all around this park, there's been a number of work over the years, both within the park and all around it. And that's a great example. And it is fundamental to our process to collect as much of that and learn from it as much as we can and build these relationships, because what happens in Candler Park and Freedom Park is should directly benefit each other's objectives. So absolutely, we want to take advantage of symbiotic, as you say, relationships between places like that, and also really leverage the knowledge and the hard work that's preceded this effort, and really build on that and not start from scratch. So.
Thank Ken for the question. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as we wait for another question, this is the perfect kind of thing, Ken. If you have any specific ideas about particular ways that we might best connect with Candler Park, those are great pinpoints to put in the mapping input, so that then we see those exact ideas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, every part of the master plan, there are points where you zoom in to solve small problems, an intersection crossing, that sort of thing. And then there are times where we zoom way out and we think well beyond the boundaries of Freedom Park and how it fits into so much larger opportunity, even one that doesn't currently exist. We're kind of drawing these big lines, these big east-west corridors that happen. There's opportunities to, through the process of this master plan, uncover other opportunities that might relate to the surrounding community or even the city as a whole, as we put the efforts of Freedom Park in context with all these other sort of initiatives and places around the city. So because you can't think too big in these efforts, is our experience.
I'm going to jump in here and ask a question of my own here. So I guess from your perspective, seeing the park and the unique nature of the park, since it started out as a highway and it's essentially a linear park, how do you think you will begin to address the kind of spread out, very porous nature of a park that is several miles long and not really defined like a lot of conventional parks are? What kind of challenges does that present and what kind of opportunities?
I'll just start real quickly. You guys jump in. We showed that analogy of the gallery, divide, and that's not a definitive answer or even way of approach, but it's a way of thinking about that. There's so much diversity in the context of what's happening around the park, and potential in the storylines of this park are absolutely incredible. The history of it, we've looked at the old stairs to the old houses that used to exist that were removed when the highway was proposed. The homes that were lost, actually. have a story to it. We've got connections to the Martin Luther King Center and of course to the Carter Center and these cool neighborhoods. So the challenge for us is really, when we kind of really got into this, was there's so many stories to tell in this park. And then it's not a big, it's not like Piedmont Park where we've got a lot of acreage within a limited boundary. We've got a lot of boundary with actually comparatively limited acreage, and with vehicles moving through there. And so what that means is it starts to shape how you approach programming. Certainly like linear programming, trails that tell stories along the way, or bring you to rooms within the park, places within the park that are maybe defined by topography or just the boundaries of the spaces. Those are all sort of ways we kind of think about kind of moving, how you move through. This park is very much today about movement, and there are great places to be within the park. But we feel like programming isn't always about a place. It could also be about an experience of movement through a place.
I was going to say, David, the other thing that I know we're going to study is brand, right? And how brand can help you get your arms around a park that is very spread out, right? Even in our conversations, we have all the maps of the park, but there's always, oh yeah, there's that little place there that's actually part of the park, right? Did we forget that? And I think by repetition of some branding element, whatever it might be, is going to be a big part of that. And sometimes it's signage. Sometimes it's maybe the way art is handled. It could even be the way that the landscape is handled, right? Like right now, the landscape, I think one thing we've been struck by is how beautiful it is, but yet it's not legible because it is so beautiful everywhere. It is kind of the same. What we'll want to do is look for creating, again, continuity and variety. So if the brand can give us continuity, we know how to kind of keep repetition going, at the same time adding that variety so that there is this kind of these special magical moments that people talk about, right? Oh, did you see that thing when you were at Freedom Park, right? So I think those are going to be the big things that I think we really push to get our arms around this park that is a bunch of arms.
Yeah, and I would also add that to help with kind of undifferentiated linear system that we sometimes think of as an impossible elephant to eat. The way we kind of eat an elephant at the urban scale in bite-sized pieces is through a system of loops. So you can only walk or bike so far, physically. It's such a long stretch of land that can seem arduous. So we'll start breaking it up in this kind of loop conditions to where it's not, you don't just think about looping inside the park, you grab some of the neighborhood, you incorporate system of the streets, a restaurant nearby, a playground. And so that way, if you almost start thinking in terms of this kind of chain links or these loops interlocking with each other, you can experience a different loop when you come back. And like to me, at least, when I go back to parks, and my kid comes with me, and he's bored. Like we want to find that new experience, that new loop to participate in. So I think that deals with the variety, but at the same time maintains integrity of the overall identity and brand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we have another question from Leanne. She asks, are there any good examples of precedents or of other spread out porous parks that you all feel have successfully dealt with similar challenges or have similar qualities that you might point out for our community to look at?
Yeah, well, part of the great thing about Freedom Park is that it's very unique. No, I think there are examples. You have to look. This is a very unique park, and that's part of Atlanta being on the leadership of creating spaces like this in the first place. But I go back way back to actually where I grew up in Boston area. There was the Emerald Necklace, a famous linear park system that was developed by Frederick Law Olmsted. And it's really it's a chain of green spaces that anytime you have a sort of a stretch of open space, it creates a very egalitarian approach to land, and lots of different communities can come into it from different angles and kind of the shared experiences and so forth. So that's sort of one example. The more recent examples, they tend to be a little bit more distilled than Freedom Park is. We think of, well, certainly the Beltline is a linear park in its own right, but Freedom Park is not only a linear park. It has linear components to it, but it also has pretty gracious, beautiful, wide open spaces that are reminiscent of spaces you would find in Central Park or Hyde Park or places like that, wide and big bowl-shaped, a lot of topography. So you really, the cop-out answer is that you kind of have to look at a lot of different types of aspects of parks and take from them what you think is successful. Because I think Freedom Park has very unique experiences. Like, the long linear trails along the road are reminiscent of a lot of sort of greenways all around the country. And then you have sort of the wide open spaces I was talking about before, which are more like these classical Olmstedian or bucolic parks that are more famous around older portions of cities, and even Piedmont Park for that matter. So I think it is kind of a bit of an amalgamation, unless you all know of the park.
Well, I mean, the one that we've talked about, and you can easily say, well, it's not like this park at all, but in other ways it is Buffalo Bayou Park here in Houston. Yeah. And if you took that park and you took the bayou out of it, it has a lot of similarities. And what they are is that park was a park before we designed it. It's just that it didn't work as a whole. It sort of worked as a series of little random spaces, right? And we figured out a way to stitch that together. It had some nature, but not a lot of nature. And we came back and figured out, how do you put a lot more nature into this place? I think it's a long linear thing. It also has roads on both sides of it. And we had to figure out, how do you actually figure out what to do with a road that is defining an edge of a park? Is that road to be included in the park design or excluded, right? So there are examples like that, that you may have to squint a little bit to figure out how it fits in and what the lessons to learn are. But I think that's kind of what we're doing, is trying to figure out how to learn those lessons from a variety of types of parks that are fixing a variety.
And I would say probably for Freedom Park, one of the challenges is to define, the point of arrival. It doesn't have to be a center. We have Carter Presidential Center at the center of the park, but we also have large open space on the Kendler side, on the Kendler Park side. So in terms of hierarchies, it's not always linear. In terms of arrival, it's not defined. Every neighborhood is owning, there is implied ownership already involved on each one of the legs of the park. So which kind of stretch of the park is more public, more regional? And that's why we kept alluding to that east-west kind of access as probably privileging that public direction, and arrival, I guess, from kind of more, not just local neighborhoods, adjacent neighborhoods, but the city as a whole. So I think dealing with hierarchy, when it comes to Freedom Park's issues, dealing with hierarchies will help resolve some of that spread out kind of porous nature.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, very good question.
Any other questions? Maybe give it another minute so I don't start saying goodbye and then questions and then say goodbye again. But as always, I mean, we do have our contact info here on the screen. Definitely get in and play around with the map, take our survey. We are happy to have feedback. A lot of great ideas already have come about.
All right, you might be in the clear, Ed. Oh, here's one.
Oh, nope.
Surprise question. Yes. So this is a statement from Paul. He says this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to think big. That's very apt.
Wholeheartedly agreed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the Conservancy agrees with that 100%, and so does SWA. So we are going to think big.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think this year, if nothing else, has shown the importance of the spaces in the city in a completely new perspective. And what's amazing is the relevance of this linear parks that feel more awkward, you know, in the typical times, suddenly, you know, rising to the top of, you know, what's really important spatially, but also environmentally in the city, and also in terms of equitable access to green spaces. So an exciting opportunity for the park to rise to the top of, I think, conversations and also experiences in Atlanta.
Yeah, and I'll say also that, you know, when you're working on a master plan, you start off in the beginning, and the beginning is the time you really want to think big, because the further you get into it, we're going to start narrowing things down, and we got to deal with more logistical information. But, you know, there's an opportunity to throw everything on the table to start with, and obviously a lot of that, most of it won't necessarily stick for all sorts of reasons. But you have to get inspired as a community. You also have to. One of the goals of this park is to inspire outside of the sphere of just the master plan to help think about, you know, how do we raise money, how do we sustain big ideas, and how do we leverage sort of these larger connections and make the park more relevant to more people, not just within the community, the immediate community, but also to adjacent institutions, to the Atlanta as a whole. The more we can position it in that respect, the bigger the opportunities will be.
Agreed.
Okay, we've got another question from Leanne. She's asking, when you get further into public engagement, will you do anything specific to engage the perspective of children and or youth, teens?
I think this is Jen from Sycamore. I think that our upcoming photo share campaign will be a great opportunity for youth and teens, especially folks who use the park with their children, to kind of weigh in on their favorite places in the park, to take photos and to post those. We'll have those, we'll have instructions for how to do that really soon and how to post those to Instagram. And then we also talked very early on when we were brainstorming about doing an idea wall, which will be a stationary location somewhere in the park for folks to just scribble out their ideas as they're using those spaces. So when you have your children out in the park or your youth are using the park, we would love for them to weigh in with just photos. And they are also, of course, welcome to our next meeting. Again, that will be a lot more interactive. We'll have, we're still coming up with the format of that, but we will have sort of separate rooms or separate sort of stations for people to give input. And it sounds like it would be a great idea to make one of those forums or one of those rooms available for the youth. So thank you for that comment. If you have youth groups in your communities and your neighborhoods that are active, we would love to know how to connect with those as well. So if you wouldn't mind emailing us those ideas or those points of contact, we will definitely incorporate them into our future engagement.
And have them use that map that Ed was talking about. I mean, my son is way more adept at computers and figuring out that stuff than I am, attaching photos and all that. So leverage that talent all around you and get those ideas pinpointed. We can't have too many ideas at this point.
And they're all on Zoom.
They're all on Zoom anyway, so it's just a click away. And I think the follow-up to that, somebody tagged on that, was and teens as well. And I think that's another incredibly important demographic. Not the least of which, because many of those teens maybe will be adults by the time this is finished. And I mean, there are different, this will take, you know, there's the master plan process, and there's the, hopefully, you know, building up to build projects or improvements over time. And so that they're going to be along with this longer ride of the park. And I know when we were working on some of the parks we've worked on in the past, we've really put a lot of emphasis on how we think about integrating opportunities for teens, younger kids, older adults, working adults, everybody, and how that mixes within a park environment, culturally and socially and so forth. And you know, for the most part, communities that have a lot of social interaction along these different age groups and demographics tend to be, it's a really positive thing. We'll certainly look for opportunities and have those conversations with you all as we move into the park, but into the design process. But I think it's never to really start thinking about what these different groups need, want, but also how they can interrelate with each other.
Thank you, Jen and Scott. I guess I'll make one final last call for questions and give it a little minute or so.
Next time we need music.
Cue the Jeopardy theme song. I guess that would be if you were giving an answer and then we, never mind. All right, it looks like that is all for the moment. Again, we've got, if you do have a question later on, shoot us an email. We'll do our best to get back to you ASAP. Come and hang out on the website. Join us October 15th. It should be a good time, and stay tuned for programming in the meantime, which we'll definitely advertise on our public engagement website, the Freedom Park website itself, Facebook, Instagram, all the things the kids are doing these days. TikTok, I don't know. Maybe not TikTok, but
Oh, we have one
we have
more
one more
question.
question. What time? October 15th. So we have been trying to accommodate as many people as possible. So we have one lunchtime session. It's going to be at noon, and then an after workday session like this one at 7. So the same times as this one, and we'll definitely post as soon as we get everything set up. We'll post it to our websites. And we'll also post the question and answer portion as well. All right.
Thank you.
So, thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the evening, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.